It's the dawning of a new age. The end of the White Lotus.
What exactly is anarchy? Is it a state of complete chaos and unrest like we saw in the BLM riots of 2020? Or is it something more akin to the small town of Cherán, Mexico, where the people finally had enough of being screwed over by their government, and so they kicked out and banished all of the politicians and their police force? And believe it or not, but ever since, they've been experiencing a great time of prosperity. Serious crimes like murders and kidnappings, which used to be frequent, dropped dramatically and overall well-being has skyrocketed. So, which is it? A senseless state of chaos, or a well-regulated society without politicians or despots? Well, potatoes. But jokes aside, with the help of the Anarchist Handbook, I'll be trying to answer all of these questions in today's episode of The Meaning of Nerd Show, a high-production video series focused on the philosophy behind your favorite cartoons, anime, and more. And today's episode is a special one. It was made as part of a bigger YouTuber collaboration called One Legendary Scene. To celebrate the 10th anniversary of The Legend of Korra, Antoine Bandele has invited me and many other YouTubers to come together and collectively make our own videos on one scene from the show that we find to be legendary. So make sure to give all of them some love and check out the playlist with all the videos in the description. Oh, and also, feel free to let me know in the comments below what your favorite scene is, and if you'd like, you can also make your own video on the topic as well, of course. With that being said though, let's now jump into my own legendary scene from The Legend of Korra. A scene that was not chosen because it made me feel a certain way or because of how epic it was, but rather because of how much it got me thinking. Of how it got me to the point of questioning a lot of things I took for granted and make me ask myself, what exactly even is anarchy?
Don't move, Zaheer. You're gonna give me some answers.
There's no need for aggression. I'll answer whatever questions you have. You deserve that much.
Who are you people, and why do you keep trying to take me?
We are part of a secret society, dedicated to restoring freedom to the world. We are the Red Lotus.
The scene I was previously referring to is the scene from Book 3, Episode 9, where Zaheer has an intense talk with Korra and explains to her his motivations and some of his goals. Personally, I love this scene because it is strongly focused on the talking, on the philosophy he supposedly supports. And it starts off with him explaining to Korra that all he wants is to show to the Avatar a better path for the world by saying that
We could have taught you so much.
Sounds like you wanted to brainwash me so I'd do whatever you wanted.
No, Korra. All I wanted was to show the Avatar a better path for the world.
And we can obviously see where he's coming from. In the current state of the world, things don't look all that prosperous. Even after the 100-year war, it feels like inequality, oppression, and overall poverty are still rampant. From the way in which the despotic Earth Queen is extorting her own citizens, all the way to how Republic City's so-called freedom clearly favors one class over the other. How poverty is almost inevitable in some cases, and ignorance is almost demanded in others. And so it's very easy to see why Zaheer would be wanting to change things. Because even though the war is over and a utopia is basically impossible to achieve, it's also not acceptable that society is flirting with the idea of a dystopia. And so I think that Zaheer has valid points and even more valid criticisms. He wants to restore balance to the world. A job that is supposed to be the Avatar's, but he decided to take it on himself. And then soon after, he goes on to claim that
Bringing the spirits back should only be the beginning.
What do you mean?
The idea of having nations and governments is as foolish as keeping the human and spirit realms separate.
And here is where this scene really gets people thinking. I mean, after all, he is not wrong, is he? In the show, but in real life as well, we often have to realize, to no one's shock at this point, that the presidents we elect and the kings and monarchs we are subject to, both of them, prove themselves to be either incompetent, despotic, or what's most often the case, both. They rule over people and their lands without any real competence. They throw around words and slogans that they never intend on fulfilling. And then, to make things worse, they end up getting us involved in stupid and needless wars. And from a philosophical standpoint, the idea of nations and borders is actually quite an interesting one. After all, if we truly believe to all be humans, that regardless of our race, religion or background, to all be of equal value, then why separate ourselves into my nation versus yours? My will against the others? Well, to be honest, it's mostly because we humans, we are inherently tribalistic. We identify with whatever tribe we feel more adjusted to, and on its own, there's nothing wrong with that. But when it becomes adversarial, when we start to elect people who can, on a whim, declare wars in the name of the tribe, that is when things become problematic to say the least. As Leo Tolstoy once wrote, slavery results from laws. Laws are made by governments, and therefore, people can only be freed from slavery by the abolition of governments. But we are born into these systems. We already live in these countries, you may say. Taking it apart would only lead to chaos and unrest. Even if you are right, how much death and destruction needs to be overcome to get there? Would it then really be worth the price? And also, I thought you were the one who said that the ends don't justify the means.
You've had to deal with a moronic president and a tyrannical queen. Don't you think the world would be better off if leaders like them were eliminated?
I don't really agree with what they've done, but taking out world leaders isn't the answer.
It wasn't too long ago that the airbenders were nearly all wiped out, thanks to the Fire Lord's desire for world dominance. True freedom can only be achieved when oppressive governments are torn down.
But that won't bring balance. It will throw the world into chaos.
Exactly. The natural order is disorder. Do you know who once said, new growth cannot exist without first the destruction of the old?
No.
The wise guru Lahima, an airbender.
And here is where we get to the point where I will have to disagree with Zaheer. I believe him to be completely right about his critique and analysis of the world. I also think that his vision of the end goal, while somewhat twisted, is still in some ways desirable. But even so, I don't believe that any of this justifies what he believes to be the right path towards it. The path of violence. While I would agree with him that the world would be better off without leaders that we worship like a cult, or that are forcefully imposed onto us, assassinating them is definitely not the way to get there. Anarchy, if it is to ever truly work, needs to come about naturally, and it needs to arise from within the people. It can't be something thrust down upon them by suddenly taking out their leader. Also considering that this would actually solve nothing at all, given that the control over the people doesn't rest on any one figurehead, but rather on the system as a whole. It would therefore, if anything, simply lead to a power vacuum that is later on taken over by someone else. Oftentimes, someone more despotic and oppressive than the previous ruler. I mean, just take a look at Kuvira, for example. And it's here where I think that the show as a whole gets Anarchy wrong. The writers probably had a Hollywood depicted view of Anarchy that doesn't even come close to represent what Anarchy is all about. Anarchy is a philosophy that is way more complex than just saying that chaos is the natural order, and so therefore, all else be damned.
Moments ago, the Earth Queen was brought down at the hands of revolutionaries, including myself. I'm not here to take over the Earth Kingdom. I think you've had enough of leaders telling you what to do. It's time for you to find your own path. From now on, you are free. I deliver Ba Sing Se back into the hands of the people.
So, when I knew that I was going to make this video, I realized that I didn't actually know that much about Anarchy. I knew that it wasn't what Hollywood depicted it as, and that fundamentally, it is a philosophy that rejects all forms of coercive authority. Also, that it often calls for the abolition of any force upon governments. From more clear examples like monarchies and state communism, all the way to more subtle examples like representative democracies and republics, where you are forced to either partake in it or go to jail for not paying your taxes. Either way though, I always found it to be very utopian in its beliefs and in no way applicable. So to make sure I could better understand it, I read The Anarchist Handbook, a collection of works written by various past and present anarchists. A book that has changed my views and perspectives unlike any author to this day. It's a book that showed to me that anarchy is not a belief in chaos, but rather a disbelief in force upon authority. It states that if we are all humans, then how could it be that some of us are allowed to rule and decide over the others? If humans are prone to mistakes and corruption, then why would any elected human be different? Why would anyone in power suddenly cease to be human? And obviously that's the point, they wouldn't. But also, anarchy is not opposed to all types of authority either, only those that are forced upon people. As Mikhail Bakunin, an anarcho-communist, believed, "Does it follow that I reject all authority? Far from me such a thought. In the matter of boots, I refer to the authority of the bootmaker. Concerning houses, I consult that of the architect. But I allow neither the bootmaker nor the architect to impose his authority upon me." And so, as you can see, anarchy is more than what Zaheer tries to portray in The Legend of Korra. It's a relationship, one in which none of the parties involved have any authority over the other. And it's exactly in this point where Zaheer and other anarchists like Johann Most go wrong for believing violence to be acceptable. Because if anarchy is primarily focused on not having any force upon authority over someone else, then thinking that you have the authority to impose your will over someone else and therefore kill them sounds very hypocritical. Besides the fact that, again, killing the Earth Queen wouldn't actually solve any problems.
Before, you were always talking about chaos and freedom. Then you took out the Earth Queen and created the worst dictator the Earth Kingdom has ever seen. Thanks for that.
But then, how do you achieve a state of anarchy? Well, anarchists believe in freedom both as an end goal, but also as a means to achieve it. They think that there's no point in fighting authoritarian government violence by applying your own violence as well. After all, you would also not try to put out a fire with more fire, would you? As Leo Tolstoy once wrote, "All attempts to get rid of governments by violence have hitherto, always and everywhere, resulted only in this, that in place of the deposed governments, new ones established themselves, often more cruel than those they replaced." And the solution that he proposes to this problem is one I can easily get behind. He believes that you abolish governments not by executing their leaders, but rather by exposing the fraud it is and the lack of its necessity. Because he truly believes that governments are only needed for one thing: to commit and then justify the most atrocious of crimes. And if you're first taken aback by this statement, maybe think back to what some of the worst crimes in the history of humanity have been. From thousands of years of slavery, to the cruel reality of the Holocaust, all the way to the unnecessary wars fought in the name of one country or the other. All of these crimes were only made possible by the existence and the support of governments. And it's this exact fraud that people need to start realizing. And so, it's easy to see why Zaheer, having probably realized this himself, has become so desperate that he believes violence to be an easy fix. But the truth is that anarchy is something incredibly hard to achieve. Not impossible, but in my opinion, harder than any other system. Because anarchy only works if every individual embraces their own lives and all the responsibilities that come with it. Anarchists believe that it can only come about naturally, by having a majority of the people realize the fraud that governments are, and then stop funding and participating in it. When people finally realize that the only reason these institutions have power in the first place is because the people believe they have it. And so, the only way to achieve real anarchy is through the people, through spreading information and knowledge and teaching every individual on how to govern himself. Not a revolution through the state, but through the masses. Basically, by changing public perception. Because otherwise, if you do it by force, it'll only end up creating a power vacuum that will be taken over by someone else. And why? Well, because the people, they will still be craving someone to govern their lives. Someone to decide over them, because they're not ready to take it up themselves. And this is why anarchism is so misunderstood. It's because it doesn't involve any special class of citizens, but rather all of humanity, making it incredibly complex, hard to understand, and even harder to believe in. But anarchy is obviously not perfect. Men and women who commit evil would still exist in an anarchist world. It just wouldn't give them the option of enforcing their malice over everyone else by being elected and then decreeing some oppressive law over the people. It's an idea that I think is worth exploring. As I previously mentioned, the anarchist town of 20,000 people in Cherán, Mexico seems to be doing great ever since they revolted in 2011. But I also realized that it may just be a foolish idea that could never truly work. I really don't know which one is true. But even so, at least I'm of the firm belief that murder is entirely immoral. And given that governments achieve almost everything they do through murder, war, and conquests, I will at least settle on refusing to support their efforts.
But you must realize that once change begins, it cannot be stopped, even by the Avatar.
Enough with your philosophical mumbo-jumbo.
Before wrapping up, I just really like to thank Antoine for inviting me to make this video. It was a great opportunity to talk about some interesting topics, so feel free to check him out in the description below. Also, if this video has made you wonder more about Anarchy and you would like to know how these things would even work in practice, I really suggest everyone here to read or listen to the Anarchist Handbook. There are many great ideas in there, some of which I really think should be explored to its fullest. But otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video. Over here we use philosophy and psychology to better understand life and to find our own meaning within it. There are many exciting things coming up, so if I were you, I'd subscribe and turn on notifications to stay up to date. See ya!
I am not a bounty hunter.